In this video, we're going to learn how to import a DXF pattern file and prepare it for use in vStitcher. Before we start, one tip. Adding an extra 10" by 10" square pattern piece to our DXF file as a reference can help us to quickly determine some of the import option settings. To begin, we're going to import a DXF file. Note that vStitcher supports DXF, AAMA, and ASTM file formats. If your DXF file has a separate rule table, a second pop-up window will appear. The second window is searching for a rule table file, .rul. If a rule file does not exist for a style, proceed by selecting Cancel. This cancels the search for the rule table only. Note, if a rule file lives in the same folder as the DXF with the same name, our software will automatically import the rule file with the DXF. If we look at the 2D window, we see a total measurement of our 2D workspace along the length and width of the visible workspace. We can also see a bounding box around each piece with the measurement. Before we can fully import the file, we need to review the Import option dialog box. Let's take a closer look at the available settings. Under Size and Rotation, there are three settings: Shape Rotation, DXF Units, Size Multiplier. For Shape Rotation, we should only need to change the setting if the piece direction makes it difficult to see the measurements. We recommend to always select Preview after changing a setting to review the effect. For DXF units, we only need to change the setting if the indicated measurement for the pattern pieces in the 2D window look incorrect. We normally leave the setting in centimeters as long as the values and size of the patterns look correct in the 2D window. Note that the unit of measurement used in the 2D window is set by our own preferences. In other words, if our preferences are set to inches, a measurement of 20 means 20 inches. Size multiplier determines the scale of the pieces. We only need to change the setting if adjusting the DXF units previously didn't give the result we want. For example, if the pieces are displayed too small, we can choose the ×10 or ×100 size multiplier to increase the scale of the pieces. If the measurements in our 2D window are accurate, we can move on to Points Optimization. These settings determine how points are displayed. Because every software creating a DXF file has its own peculiarities, we may need to experiment to find the best setting. If selected, Detect Corner Points means the software tries to detect which points are corner points and to display them as such. If Import DXF Turn Points is selected, vStitcher displays the turn points as corner points. Note, if importing a DXF file created in Gerber AccuMark, you may find it best to disable this setting. Perform Curve Optimization removes any unnecessary intermediate points along curved lines. Let's assume we are happy with the default settings and move on to the last section, Grading. Nest allows us to preview the graded nest in the 2D window. Align Grade by Grain Line ensures the pattern pieces are aligned by their grain line direction. If available for selection, Auto Grade Ungraded Internal Elements automatically grades internal elements. Once we are happy with the settings, we click OK and the file is imported. Note, the system remembers the last settings we used in the dialog box, so we don't need to remember them if we are importing several files from the same source software. In this video, we've shown how to import a DXF file. For more information, check out the Browser Help Center. In this video, we're going to learn about the 2D Resources tab in the Context view. With our garment file loaded, let's go to the 2D part of the Resources tabs. We can see each pattern piece listed in the 2D tab. Each pattern piece is displayed with its name followed by its ID. The ID is a system-generated number displayed in square brackets. We cannot edit the ID, but we can edit the name by double-clicking the existing name and typing in whatever we want for the new name. Note that we can toggle the display of the piece information in the 2D window using the eye icon in the 2D window toolbar. If we'd like to see the piece names on the 2D window, we will need to navigate to our main menu, View, 2D Display, Shape Options, and ensure Pieces Names is selected. We can select a piece by clicking on it, after which it appears with a blue highlight. When we import a DXF file, we may see a warning icon display on the pattern piece list in the 2D tab. This is typically to remind us that we need to arrange the pattern piece before we can simulate the garment. This topic is covered in detail in a separate video. If we hover our mouse over a piece, we can see two icons displayed on the right side. These are Lock and Don't Use. If we click the lock icon, this locks the piece so the shape and edge lines can neither be edited nor removed. If we click the Don't Use icon, this hides the piece so it does not display, but it is still part of the garment file. Clicking the icon on the left expands the pattern piece, displaying a list of all the elements that are part of it. Note the search facility at the top, which allows us to easily find pattern pieces. Finally, on this tab, note the advanced options available on this hamburger menu. Now let's move away from the 2D tab and focus on the context view. The contents of the context view depend on the element we select and the tool we select. For example, when we select a pattern piece, the context view displays options relevant for a piece. Similarly, when we select a line, the context view displays options relevant for a line. However, notice how the line options change depending on whether we select an edge, an internal line, a floating line. And when we select a point, the available options in the context view change. Lastly, if you have selected a pattern in the 2D or 3D window, you can toggle to the line or point in the context view to select all the lines or points on the pattern. In this video, you've learned about the 2D Resources tab and gained an understanding of the context view logic. For more information, check out the Browser Help Center. In this video, we're going to show you how to create shape symmetry. Shape symmetry allows us to link pieces or edges so that actions done to one are automatically done to the other. Applying symmetry to all possible pattern pieces can greatly increase speed and efficiency when building 3D garments. There are two types of symmetry: piece symmetry and inner symmetry. Piece symmetry links one piece to a mirrored copy of the same piece. Piece symmetry is indicated by text at the bottom left of the shape. The text refers to the ID number of the pattern piece. We can toggle the display of these ID numbers. Piece symmetry has two directions that the piece actions can mirror: x-axis, meaning the horizontal left and right, y-axis, meaning the vertical up and down. Let's create a symmetrical copy of the back bodice piece. We can do this by selecting the piece in the 2D window and then going to the Actions part of the context view and clicking the symmetry we want. Now we have a symmetrical copy of our pattern piece. If we make a change to the original piece, the change is automatically replicated on the symmetrical piece. To cancel piece symmetry, we select the piece in the 2D window and then go to the Actions part of the context view, this time clicking Cancel. Note that although we cancel the symmetry, both pieces remain. Edge symmetry extends the symmetry of a piece by using an edge. Applied edge symmetry is indicated by a dashed line through a pattern piece. Note that the pattern pieces created with fold lines in third-party DXF softwares are often imported with a dashed inner symmetry line displaying. Let's apply edge symmetry to this. We do this by selecting the edge in the 2D window and then going to the Actions part of the context view and at Edge Symmetry, clicking Create. The original piece is extended through the chosen edge. The new piece has symmetry on each side of the symmetry line. To cancel edge symmetry, we select the piece in the 2D window and then go to the Actions part of the context view. We have two options, keep both or keep half. If we select Keep Both, the pattern piece remains but with symmetry canceled. If we select Keep Half, only the original half of the pattern piece is retained. Finally, note that if we have a full pattern piece without inner symmetry, we can add it within the shape. In this video, you've learned about shape symmetry. For more information, check out the Browser Help Center. In this video, we're going to show you how to arrange pattern pieces for simulation. Let's load the tutorial file to begin. Arranging the pattern pieces is a necessary part of building a 3D garment. In this step, we are letting the simulation know where on the avatar the pattern pieces should drape from. This step is comparable to pinning paper pattern pieces to a dress form, and arranging the pattern pieces properly improves the simulation output. To go to Arrange mode, we click on the Arrange button. The pattern pieces are displayed in the Arrangement mode version of the 2D window. The position of the pattern pieces does not change from the standard 2D window. Note that setting up the pattern pieces in the 2D window before going into Arrange mode can smooth the workflow. We now see a view of the right side, front, left side, and back of the avatar shape. In each view, there are light gray sections of the body. These sections are called clusters. In Arrange mode, we drag each pattern piece to the cluster it should drape from when the garment is simulated. For example, let's start by arranging the front pattern piece. As we drag it into position, a labeled bounding box is displayed to help us ensure we put the piece in the right cluster. If we make a mistake, we simply drag the piece out of the cluster. In the Download section, you'll find a handout that describes the different clusters available in Arrange mode. As a beginner, you can refer to this document to know where each cluster is. Here are some important points to note about placing pieces in Arrange mode. First, the cluster is sensitive to which cluster our cursor touches, not where the pattern outline touches. Second, if we are dragging a piece and delay while hovering over a cluster, the bounding box flashes twice, indicating the piece is now in that cluster. Finally, we can stack multiple pattern pieces in the same cluster. When we add a pattern into the cluster, it means that the pattern is visible in the 3D window. To view the pattern in 3D, we click on Prepare on the main toolbar. This is Prepare mode. The patterns we have added into the cluster are visible and correspond to the positions placed in Arrange mode. Moving the patterns in the 2D window moves the patterns in the 3D window and the other way around. At the top of the 3D window, we click this icon to view patterns which we have not added to any clusters. We are also able to drag and drop a pattern into a cluster in the 3D window. We simply drag the pattern and drop it onto the avatar. When dragging the pattern, the clusters appear as boxes on the avatar. The clusters also correspond to the clusters in the 2D window. For example, let's drag the back bodice pattern to the back of the avatar. Once the back bodice pattern is successfully added onto the back torso cluster, the pattern is prepared flat on the back of the avatar and arranged in the 2D window. Now we can continue to arrange the patterns into the clusters. We can work in the 2D or 3D window to complete this step. For the skirt patterns, we drag the pattern and place our cursor close but not on the leg of the cluster. There we can see the skirt cluster appear, and we can drop the pattern in. The skirt pattern is prepared flat on the avatar in the 2D window. Had we dragged the skirt pattern onto the legs, it would have been added into the leg cluster and would appear wrapping around the leg instead. We remove the pattern and drag it into the skirt cluster again. We repeat this for the back skirt patterns, ensuring that they are added to the back skirt cluster and not the back leg cluster. The waistband can be added to the front low waist cluster, which allows it to wrap around the waist of the avatar. Let's focus now in the 2D window. More details about adjusting the patterns in the 3D window will be covered in the next lesson. When we add our pattern pieces to the right cluster, we might need to make some adjustments. For example, what if the pattern piece is facing in the wrong direction? If this happens, we can click on the piece and use the gizmo to rotate it to the correct position. Remember that you can restrict the gizmo rotation to moves of 45 degrees by holding down the Shift key while rotating the gizmo. As another example, we might want to fix alignment of a pattern piece in the cluster. Let's make sure the torso piece is centered. All done! In this video, you've learned how to arrange pattern pieces for use in 3D. For more information, visit our help website. In this video, we're going to show you how to prepare pattern pieces for simulation. Clicking the Prepare button, going into Prepare mode, displays the previously arranged pattern pieces in the 3D window. Any patterns that are not added into a cluster in the Arrange mode will not appear in 3D. If you would like to view the patterns we have not added into clusters, we click on this icon at the top of the 3D window. Note, if a garment is already stitched, we also see the stitching in Prepare mode. We covered this in videos dealing with stitching. Let's enlarge the 3D window. Since we are working in the 3D window, we can use the 3D navigation tools to view each piece and its position on the avatar. A tip is to think of the pattern pieces in this view as if they are pieces of paper to be pinned onto a dress form. As a best practice, we want to ensure 4 key elements so that our patterns are placed in optimal positions. 1. Each piece is lined up to where it would sit on the body. 2. Each piece is correctly lined up with each piece it connects to. 3. Each pattern piece is as close to the avatar body as possible without going through the avatar. 4. Each edge has space between to see most edges without overlapping. This will help later when we learn about stitching in another video. We can take a closer look at these examples. The images on the right are showing non-optimal prepare positions. The pieces are either positioned too far away from the body, too far from the intended position after draping, or have stitches or patterns cutting through the avatar. The images on the left show the optimal positions. You can see they meet the 4 key points as we mentioned previously. Now let's look at how we actually move pieces. To do this, we choose the Select tool and then click the cluster we want to move. The object that appears on the Select cluster is the 3D gizmo. Each arrow and circle moves or rotates the pattern piece in the indicated direction. Let's have a closer look at how the 3D gizmo works. When our mouse is hovering over a gizmo direction, that line becomes yellow. This helps us select the right part of the gizmo to execute the movement we want. The green arrow moves the clusters up and down. The red arrow moves the clusters right and left. And the blue arrow moves the clusters forwards and backwards. Note, remember to navigate your 3D window so it's easy to see the movements of the clusters. For example, if we want to move the clusters forwards or backwards, we can rotate the 3D window to a 3/4 view of the avatar so that we can see the blue arrow on the 3D gizmo and the distance of the cluster from the avatar more easily. Using the circles on the 3D gizmo, we can rotate the clusters. If we click and drag the green circle, it rotates the clusters left and right. If we click the red circle, it rotates the clusters forwards and backwards. And if we drag the blue circle, it rotates the pattern sideways. For example, we can use the circle on the 3D gizmo to rotate the waistband to a more optimal position. Here's another tip for rotating patterns like neckbands or waistbands. The opening of the pattern should be positioned where it needs to be stitched. If the waistband closes at the center back, rotate the piece to be positioned this way. If the waistband closes on the wearer's right, rotate it so the opening is positioned there. At the end of each of the gizmo's directional arrows is a cube. Clicking and dragging these cubes scale the pattern pieces, but only for simulation purposes. This means that even though the pattern is smaller or larger in the prepare mode after scaling, the pattern measurements are not changed, and it will revert back to its original size when you dress the garment. In other words, if we use this tool to scale down, it would be like crumbling or squishing the paper pattern to start smaller in the simulation. Finally, note that the available directions on the gizmo are dependent on the cluster to which the piece belongs. For example, the torso cluster has all the directions available, whereas the neck cluster has more limited options. When moving patterns in prepare mode, notice how the whole cluster moves and not a single pattern piece. If you would like to move a single pattern piece within a cluster, press and hold the Control key on your PC keyboard or Command for Mac and select the pattern you want to move. Use the arrows to adjust the position. Also note, we are not able to move a single pattern within a cluster forwards and backwards or rotate it. This option will be covered in the Arrange Level 2 video. As we have learned in the previous lesson, the Arrange mode and the Prepare mode are connected. Another way is for us to select the individual pattern from the 2D window. When we add a pattern into a cluster, the pattern is automatically selected. Hence, you will not see the full gizmo. Instead, you will only see the gizmo to move the selected pattern along the Y and X axis. So if we want to move the whole cluster, just select the pattern by clicking on the background. Then select the cluster in the 3D window. If you've accidentally made any changes with the 3D gizmo and would like to revert to the original Prepare position and scale, go to the Arrange mode, Context View, and you can click the Reset buttons for the position, rotation, and scale. In summary, working in Prepare mode allows us to fine-tune the positions of the pattern pieces around the avatar, which helps us to get the best simulation results. In this video, you've learned how to prepare the garment for simulation. For more information, visit our help website. In this video, we're going to show you how to use the Stitch tool. The Stitch tool, located on the main toolbar, allows us to apply stitching to pattern pieces and internal elements. In V-Stitcher, we have two types of stitching, single and multi-stitch. Multi-stitch will be covered in a separate video. When stitching your garment, it may help to think of each pattern piece as a piece in a puzzle, and the Stitch tool solves how we connect each piece in the puzzle. Before we stitch, it's best to identify the edges and count how many edges we wish to stitch. Single stitch can be used if we want to stitch single edges together, while multi-stitch can be used if there are more than one edge on either side of the stitch. So how do we know how many edges there are? Let's have a closer look at this pattern in V-Stitcher. On each pattern piece, we can identify the edges by looking at the corner points. An edge is a line between two corner points. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 edges in total. If we have a corner point added here, it splits the line into two parts. Hence, it is now edge number 1 and number 2. You can easily remove a corner point by clicking on the corner point and unchecking corner point in the context view. For example, we would like to stitch these edges together. In this case, there is one edge here and one edge here, so we use a single stitch. If there were more than one edge, it would require multi-stitching. To stitch, we simply click on the first edge, then the second edge. We see a solid line and a pin appears on the edge to indicate that the stitch has been created. Great, let's apply this logic to a garment. Note that we have already arranged and prepared this file. We can stitch in the 2D window and the 3D window. Let's focus on stitching in the 3D window by expanding it. We ensure the cursor is in the 3D window, then press Tab. We recommend stitching in the 3D window as it is much easier to visualize the edges we need to stitch. In the 3D window, you can also see the corner points, notches, and the stitches when they are created. If there are edges that can't be seen clearly in the 3D window, then we can stitch in the 2D window. We need to identify the edges that require single stitch. For example, the shoulder edges. Note that a highlight color is displayed to show the edge we are hovering on. This helps us verify we've selected the correct edge or if we've accidentally clicked on an incorrect edge. When ready to start our stitch, we click the edge. Then we move to the second edge in the stitch. We hover our mouse over the edge, check that the highlight color matches the first edge, then click to select it. An icon is displayed on each stitched edge. If you have clicked on the wrong edge, you can simply deselect by clicking on the background or by clicking on the same edge again. If you have completed the stitch and notice that there is an error, you can delete the stitch and restitch again. To remove a stitch, we click the stitch icon, then press Delete on the context view or by clicking Delete on your keyboard. Note: if shape symmetry applies, the system automatically sews the symmetrical edges. Here's a tip. When working with complex garments, you can turn off the 3D stitch pins to have a clearer view of the garment and its edges. To do so, we click on this button on the horizontal contextual menu to enable and disable the pins. And that's how we create a single stitch. Let's use the single stitch to complete the sewing on all the edges that require single stitch. We will continue stitching the edges which require multi-stitch in the next video. In this video, we've shown you how to sew a garment using the single stitch tool. For more information, check out the Browsware Help Center. In this video, we're going to show you how to use the multi-stitch tool. As mentioned in the single stitch video, we use the stitch tool in V-Stitcher to sew pattern pieces into garments. We also need to evaluate the number of edges we want to stitch together. We will use the multi-stitch tool if multiple edges are stitching to each other. Multi-stitch allows us to identify a group of edges to sew to either one single edge or another group of edges. We can practice a multi-stitch on these blocks first. When doing a multi-stitch, we first need to identify the edges we want to stitch from and the edges we want to stitch to. For example, we would like to stitch from these 2 edges to these 3 edges. In this case, these 2 edges are what we call the from edges, and these 3 edges are what we call the to edges. To perform a multi-stitch, we must check multi-stitch on the horizontal contextual menu. Next to the multi-stitch option, you will see the buttons From and To. We need to select the from edges first, in chronological order. When we click on the edges with multi-stitch, we will see an arrow. The arrow indicates the direction of the stitch. Note, the stitches should always be going in one direction. So if we want to stitch from the top, we must select the top edge first, then the bottom edges. The arrows should also be facing the intended direction. You can easily adjust the direction by toggling over to the other side of the edge. Just click to confirm the direction. The edges that you have selected will also show up on the context view. Great! Once the from edges are complete, we will need to switch to To in the horizontal contextual menu. Now we select the 2 edges. Remember, the direction must be the same as the from edges. Once that is complete, we will see the preview of the stitches shown as a dotted line. This allows us to check accuracy. If they are incorrect, we can clear all the selections and start again. If everything is okay, click Done in the horizontal contextual menu or Enter on your keyboard to confirm the stitches. Note: confirmed stitches will show as a solid line when you click on the stitch. If you'd like more practice before trying out a garment, you can use multi-stitch to connect these shapes within the downloadable file. Okay, let's apply the logic to a garment. Just like single stitch, we can use multi-stitch in the 2D window and the 3D window. We'll be working in the 3D window for this example. We ensure the cursor is in the 3D window, then press Tab to enlarge. For example, this front bodice is split up into two edges, and we need to stitch to the back side seam. Once we have selected the stitch tool, we can select the multi-stitch feature on the horizontal contextual menu. We start by choosing the From edges. Remember that a highlight color and arrow direction are displayed to indicate the edge we are hovering on. We click to select the edge. Now that we have a stitch direction, as shown by the arrow, we should ensure that all of the other From edges match that direction. To select the second From edge, we hover our mouse over it until we are happy with the stitch direction. When ready, we click to select the edge. When we have selected all the From edges, we need to identify the edges to be stitched to. First, we need to enable the To option. Note: when using the multi-stitch tool, if we hover over an edge, the cursor displays a text reminder telling us if we are using the From or To selection. Now, we repeat the steps to select the group of edges that are stitched to. Once we have made all of our From and To selections, we select Done to finish. And that's how we use the multi-stitch tool. We can use multi-stitch to complete the rest of the garment. Before finishing, here are a few useful tips. As a best practice, start stitching in the 3D window. If an edge is small or too difficult to stitch in the 3D window, switch to the 2D window. You can start the From edges in the 3D window, then complete the To edges in the 2D window. Another tip when stitching in the 3D window is that we can use the saved camera angles and the 3D navigation toolbar to rotate around the garment. In this video, we've shown you how to sew a garment using the multi-stitch tool. For more information, check out the Browseware Help Center. In this video, we're going to learn more about simulation tools. The simulation tools can be found on the top right of the main toolbar, which includes Prepare, Dress, Finish, Undress, and Styling tools. We have already learned about the Prepare mode in the previous lesson. To begin, we'll load the tutorial file from the previous lesson, where the pieces are already arranged and prepared. To start, a useful tip: Prepare mode. Pressing the Prepare button is a quick way to reset the garment simulation. Dressing a garment will allow pattern pieces we have prepared to drape on the avatar, and for the avatar to go from its prepare pose to the final pose that was selected at the top of the 3D window. We click on the Dress button to begin simulating the garment. When we click on Dress, we'll see that the Finish button is highlighted with a line moving around the edge of the icon while the simulation continues. The first simulation from Prepare mode would be completed automatically, meaning that each time we click Prepare, then Dress, we don't have to manually click on the Finish button for the simulation to be completed. The line circles around the Finish icon until the simulation is complete. Once the simulation is complete, the Finish icon grays out. When we make any changes to the garment that may affect simulation, the Dress icon changes to Update 3D. This indicates that there are changes to the garment that we may need to simulate. For example, if we amend the stitching or edit the pattern shapes, we can try to delete a stitch on the garment. Let's delete the stitch on the side seam to see the change. You can now see that the Dress icon has changed to Update 3D. Click on Update 3D to allow the garment to simulate. As the garment simulates, the lines continue to circle around the Finished icon. This indicates that the garment is in a simulation process and will only complete simulation once we manually click on the Finish icon. So what happens after we complete a simulation? When we finish a simulation of a garment, there will be a snapshot saved. A snapshot saves the final simulated garment and works as a reference point, allowing you to quickly retrieve previously simulated output of a dressed garment. We can click on this icon to load a snapshot, or we can also view snapshots in the 3D Resources pane. Here's an example of how we can utilize a snapshot. At any time, we can use the Undress button to remove the garment from simulation. We can dress the garment again in two ways. 1. Using Prepare, then beginning simulation again using Dress. Or 2. Loading a snapshot. Loading a snapshot is really useful if we don't want to redress the garment from Prepare again. There are two types of snapshots: an automatic snapshot and a manual snapshot. An automatic snapshot is created each time a simulation finishes, and it overwrites the previous snapshot for the same avatar. For example, we can restitch the side seam of the garment, then click Dress. Once we click Finish, the previous snapshot with the side seam unstitched is no longer available and is replaced with the current simulated garment snapshot. A manual snapshot must be created. This snapshot will not be overwritten when we dress and finish the garment. To save a manual snapshot, we go to the Snapshots pane located in the 3D Resource pane and click Save Snapshot. Name the snapshot, then click Save. The snapshot now appears on the Snapshots pane, and the name will also be indicated here. The selected snapshot will be highlighted. Do note, for manual snapshots, it only saves the drape of the garment. Therefore, if you change stitching, fabric, or pattern piece, you need to update the manual snapshot. For example, if we were to edit the stitching of the garment again, let's delete the stitch on the side seam again. Dress and finish the garment. An automatic snapshot will be created. If we load the manually saved snapshot created previously, it will load the drape at the time we save the snapshot. However, the Dress button will prompt you to update 3D. When we click on Update 3D, the side seam will open up as we have deleted the stitch. Great! Now we have a better understanding of snapshots. Before we end, we want to share with you some useful points on snapshots. Number 1. When you open a BW file, the first thing you should check is if it has a snapshot. This would save you time, as you do not have to prepare and dress every single BW file you open. Number 2, when we have multiple snapshots, it can be confusing to remember which snapshot would be overwritten if we simulate the garment. When simulating, we will see on the snapshot pane that a snapshot is highlighted. This is the snapshot that would be overwritten once we clicked Finish. Number 3. While simulating, if we need to stop the simulation without saving the current drape, we can load a snapshot again. In this case, it would not finish the simulation and load back the previous drape so we can work from there again. Lastly, if we dress the garment on another avatar or another pose, the automatic snapshot created with the previous avatar or pose would not be replaced. It would create another automatic snapshot with the selected avatar. In this video, you've learned how to simulate a garment and work with snapshots. For more information, visit our help website. In this video, we're going to show you how to use the 3D styling tool. This tool allows us to position the garment for presentation. For example, when you get dressed at home or trying the garment, you use your hands to adjust where the garment sits on your body. That is what this tool does with your 3D garment. Now let's learn more about this tool so we can improve the look of this garment. The 3D styling tool is located on the far right of the main toolbar, along with the other simulation tools. When we turn on the tool, the 3D styling pane is displayed. The horizontal contextual menu displays various options, and our simulation appears to pause. This is because when using the tool, we are adjusting the drape. When we are ready, we can let the simulation finish. Let's look at the styling tools. Pinch, brush, and move. When pinch is turned on, we can grab a small area of the garment and move it. To use pinch, we left-click and hold the mouse, then drag in the direction we want to move. We press dress to simulate the garment from its new position. When we press the dress button at this stage, gravity is applied and the fabric drapes from its new position. When using the 3D styling tool, small and slow mouse movements provide better control of the fabric movement. When brush is turned on, we can select which areas we would like to move using the brush stroke, then move that selection. To use brush, we left-click and hold our mouse, then move the mouse to make a selection. Once we have selected the area we want, we release the mouse button. Then we hover the mouse over the pin and drag the selected area. Here are a couple of useful tips for the brush tool. To select multiple areas, press the Shift key while making the selections. To select an entire piece, press the Control key, then click the piece you want to select. On a Mac, press the Command key. Within the brush tool, we can enable Erase. When Erase is turned on, we can erase any part of the brush selection by dragging our mouse over the part of the selection we want to remove. The Radius option adjusts the size of the area we can select and works for pinch, brush, and erase. Take some time now to get acquainted with the pinch and brush tool. You can pause the video here. Within the pinch and brush tool, we also have the option between the regular effect and the focused effect. Regular is selected by default, and styling with this effect may also affect the whole garment. If focus is selected, the simulation is triggered only for the area affected by that tool and the immediate surrounding parts of the garment. Pinching with this option will feel a little stickier than your regular pinch, as it gives you more control on a smaller portion of the garment. You can pause the video here to take some time to try pinching and styling the garment with the irregular and focused effect. Hold, flatten, and retouch are properties that we can apply once we have selected part of the garment. Each of these is color-coded. Hold is blue, flatten is orange, retouch is pink. Now let's look at each one. The hold property holds the selected area in place. As other areas of the garment are styled, the held selection is not affected. The flatten property smooths out the selected area by allowing the fabric to be released. The retouch property will allow us to shrink or stretch the fabric in a selected area. Note that this function only affects the look of the simulation. It does not affect the actual size or fit of the garment. For example, in real life, if we stretch a fabric too much, it begins to tear. In 3D, if we stretch a fabric too much, it appears like an explosion. The retouch function is most often used for presentation purposes. Once a styling property is applied to the garment, the styling icon changes in color. This may help when investigating how a garment is draping. For example, is it draping this way because of how it was prepared or because it has been styled this way? Finally, if we want to remove all the styling properties from our garment, we can use the Select All and Clear buttons. You can also remove any individual selection by clicking the pin to select it, then clicking Clear. Let's take a moment so you can try out the different styling properties available in the Pinch and Brush tool. The last styling tool is the Move tool. We use the Move tool to move a selected pattern piece or pieces without triggering further simulation and without any collisions with the avatar or other pieces. To move a piece, we click the piece and drag it. To select multiple pieces, we click on Shift while selecting the pieces and we can move them. We will be sharing more information and use cases for the Focused Effect and Move tool in the 201 Styling Simulation course. In this video, you've learned how to use the 3D styling tool. For more information, check out the Browser Help Center. In this video, we're going to show the steps to create a t-shirt, starting with the DXF file and ending with a 3D simulation. Creating a garment going from a 2D DXF file to 3D simulation involves these steps. 1. Importing DXF. 2. Arranging pattern pieces. 3. Preparing pieces. 4. Stitching. 5. Simulating. If you are a beginner, we recommend following these steps until you're more comfortable about developing your own workflow. Let's start with step 1, importing the DXF file. Everything looks fine, so we can click OK to complete the import. Now that we know the measurements are accurate, let's hide our 10 by 10 square that we were using as a reference. Now we review the points along the pattern edge to determine if they will stitch accurately. Reviewing this piece, we decide to change one point to a corner point. We're doing this because the corner point separates the line segment, making for easier stitching later. Next, we will add piece or edge symmetry. As a beginner, it is best practice to add as much symmetry as possible. To finish this step, we'll save our file. Step 2 is arranging pieces. The first thing we want to do is to make sure we are arranging on the correct avatar. For this file, we want to use Olivia. The next thing we want to do is line up the pattern pieces in the 2D window. Because the pieces maintain their position once in arrangement mode, lining them up first makes arranging that a little bit easier. Once we are in arrange mode, what we need to do is move each pattern piece to the cluster area of the body it should drape from. Remember that we can also arrange the patterns into clusters within the 3D window. We complete arrangement by moving each of the pattern pieces into the appropriate cluster. We'll save our work. You can pause here if you need more time to arrange the patterns. Now we are ready for step 3, preparing the garment. In prepare mode, we use the 3D gizmo when we need to improve the position of any pattern piece on the avatar. We'll enlarge our 3D window so we can easily navigate around our avatar. We want to position each piece so it sits where it would naturally drape on the body for the best simulation results. The neckband closes at the wearer's left shoulder seam of the t-shirt, so we can rotate the neckband opening to the right position. We also want to move the pieces so that the edges are visible as we navigate around. This helps make stitching easier. As always, having completed this stage, we make sure to save our work. Now we are ready for step 4, stitching. As a beginner, it's best practice to start with single stitching. Notice that when we hover over our neckband edge, it is one continuous line segment. Since we know this edge needs to be sewn to multiple pieces, we use the multi-stitch tool. Note that if we had changed the notch points to corner points, it would break up the line segments, and we would not need to use the multi-stitch tool. Again, we'll save our file. Now stitching is complete, we can start step 5, simulation. If we miss a stitch, it's easily noticeable during simulation. We can fix this by going back to prepare mode and stitching the missed edge. The last step before saving is to save a snapshot of the final simulation. Finally, we save our file. That's it. We have turned a 2D DXF file into a 3D garment. For more information, check out the Browser Help Center. In this video, we're going to show the steps to create a pair of trousers, starting with a DXF file and ending with a 3D simulation. Creating a garment going from a 2D DXF file to 3D simulation involves these steps. 1. Importing DXF. 2. Arranging pieces. 3. Preparing pieces. 4. Stitching. 5. Simulating. If you are a beginner, we recommend following these steps until you're more comfortable about developing your own workflow. Let's start with step 1, importing the DXF file. Everything looks fine, so we can click OK to complete the import. Now that we know the measurements are accurate, let's hide our 10 by 10 square that we were using as a reference. Now we review the points along the pattern edge to determine if they will stitch accurately. Next, we will add piece or edge symmetry. As a beginner, it is best practice to add as much symmetry as possible. To finish this step, we save our file. Step 2 is arranging pieces. The next thing we want to do is line up the pattern pieces in the 2D window. Because the pieces maintain their position once in arrangement mode, lining them up first makes arranging a little bit easier. Once we are in arrange mode, what we need to do is move each pattern piece to the cluster area of the body it should drape from. Remember that we can also arrange the patterns into clusters via the 3D window. As a beginner, it is best practice to start arrangement of the trouser legs on the side view. This is often the best arrangement for simulation. To do this, we line up the pattern piece side seams with the center of the side view clusters. We complete arrangement by moving each of the pattern pieces to the appropriate cluster. We'll save our work. You can pause the video here if you need more time to arrange the patterns into clusters. The next thing we want to do is to make sure we are arranging on the correct avatar. For this file, We want to use Oliver. Now we are ready for step 3, preparing the garment. We'll enlarge our 3D window so we can easily navigate around our avatar. In Prepare mode, we use the 3D gizmo where we need to improve the position of any pattern piece on the avatar. We want to position each piece so it sits where it would naturally drape on the body for the best simulation results. The waistband for this pant closes on the center back, so we rotate the waistband opening to the back of the avatar. We also want to move the piece so that all the edges are visible as we navigate around. This helps make stitching easier. As always, having completed this stage, we make sure to save our work. Now we are ready for step 4, stitching. As a beginner, it's best to practice to start with single stitching. Since the trouser legs curve around the leg and under the crotch, it is difficult to view the pattern edge for stitching. Remember that we can stitch in the 2D window as well. So now we will view the 2D window and stitch our front inseam to back inseam edges, the front rise to front rise edges, and the back rise to back rise edges. Notice that when we hover over our waistband edge, it is one continuous line segment. Since we know that this edge needs to be sewn to multiple pieces, we use the multi-stitch tool. Note that if we change notch points to corner points, it would break up the line segments and we would not need to use the multi-stitch tool. Again, we'll save our file. Now stitching is complete, we can start step 5, simulation. If we miss a stitch, it's easily noticeable during simulation. We can fix this by going back to Prepare mode and stitching the missed edge. The last step before saving is to save a snapshot of the final simulation. Finally, we save our file. That's it! We have turned a 2D DXF file into a 3D garment. For more information, check out the Browseware Help Center.